Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. In today's lesson, we're looking at the cue card. Describe a challenging technological problem you faced. You should say what the problem was, when and where you faced it, how challenging it was, and explain how you solved it. We'll start by listening to two model answers. After each response, we'll break it down according to the cue card points. Finally, we'll go through some useful vocabulary and phrases that you can use to describe similar experiences. Let's get started.
I had a pretty stressful technology problem earlier this year when I was preparing for an online interview for a summer internship. The interview was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon, and I was in my apartment near campus. Because I really wanted this position, I'd spent days researching the company and practicing my answers. So I felt completely prepared. Everything seemed under control until about 15 minutes before the interview. As a precaution, I decided to test my camera and microphone. To my surprise, my laptop's microphone wasn't picking up any sound at all. At first, I assumed it was just a minor glitch. So I closed the application, restarted it, and checked the audio settings. However, nothing worked. I tried a few other programs, but the laptop simply wouldn't detect my voice. What made the situation so stressful was the timing. The interview was only minutes away, and I didn't have enough time to properly troubleshoot the issue. I was worried that a technical problem right at the beginning would make me seem unprepared and affect my chances of getting the internship. To solve the problem, I quickly checked my system settings and realized that a recent update had changed my microphone permissions. I turned them back on, but unfortunately, the microphone still wasn't working. Since I was running out of time, I decided to stop troubleshooting and switch to a backup plan. I grabbed my tablet, opened the interview app, and tested the audio to make sure everything was working. I also sent a quick message to the interviewer explaining that I might need to join from a different device. Fortunately, the interview went smoothly and the tablet worked perfectly throughout the call. Looking back, I was just relieved that I stayed calm, adapted quickly, and managed to deal with the problem before the interview started.
That was a strong answer from Finn. Now let's break it down using the 4 points from the cue card. The first point is what the problem was. Finn immediately introduces the problem. His laptop microphone stopped working before an important online interview. This works well because the situation is immediately clear. For the second point, when and where it happened, he gives clear background information. He tells us that it happened earlier this year, on a Tuesday afternoon, while he was in his apartment near campus. For the third point, how challenging it was, he explains the pressure behind the problem. It wasn't just a broken microphone. The interview was about to begin, and he was worried that the issue could affect his chances of getting the internship. Finally, he explains how he solved it. Instead of spending too much time fixing the laptop, he made a practical decision and switched to another device. Now let's hear from Blondie.
To be honest, I like to think I'm quite organised. But earlier this year, I had a serious tech issue at work that completely threw me off. I work as a marketing coordinator, and during a particularly busy period, I was scheduled to lead an important pitch presentation for a potential new client at 9 a.m. I had spent weeks preparing the slide deck and making sure everything was perfect. The night before, everything was working fine, but when I arrived at the office around 7:30 a.m. to do some final preparation, I couldn't open the file. Every time I clicked on it, an error message appeared saying that the file was corrupted. I immediately panicked because my manager was relying on me. The client was arriving that morning, and recreating a 40-slide presentation from scratch in such a short time was almost impossible. What made the situation even more challenging was that our IT help desk didn't start until 8:30, so I couldn't simply wait for someone else to fix it. I had to take action quickly. I used my phone to search for possible solutions and found a workaround that involved opening the damaged file with another presentation program. Luckily, it managed to recover most of the important content, including the text and images. The formatting was slightly damaged, so I spent the remaining time fixing the layout, adjusting the fonts, and making sure everything looked professional. By 8:45, I had a working version ready, and thankfully, the presentation went smoothly. The client seemed impressed, and nobody realised there had been a problem beforehand. It was definitely one of the most stressful situations I've experienced at work, but I was relieved that I managed to stay calm and find a solution under pressure.
Once again, let's break this answer down according to the 4 parts of the cue card. For the first point, Blondie clearly explains the problem. The presentation file she needed for an important client meeting became corrupted. For the second point, she clearly explains when and where the problem happened. She tells us she was at work preparing for a client presentation early in the morning. For the third point, how challenging it was, she focuses on the consequences. Her manager was depending on her, the client was arriving shortly, and there wasn't enough time to recreate a 40-slide presentation from scratch. For the final point, explaining how she solved the problem, she outlines a clear step-by-step resolution. Instead of waiting for the IT help desk to open, she explains how she researched a workaround, recovered the critical content, and fixed the layout issues herself. Now that we've looked at 2 sample responses for this cue card, let's move on to some useful vocabulary and expressions for describing technological problems, explaining challenges, and talking about solutions. One useful phrase is a technical issue, which is a general and natural way to describe a problem with a device, software, or system. For example, you could say, I had a technical issue with my laptop right before an important presentation. Another common expression is a glitch. This usually refers to a small or unexpected problem, especially with software or digital systems. For example, if an app suddenly closes or a feature stops working, you could say, I thought it was just a minor glitch, so I restarted the application. You can also use simple phrases like stop working or fail unexpectedly when describing what happened. For example, my microphone suddenly stopped working, or the system failed unexpectedly during the meeting. These expressions are useful because they allow you to describe the problem clearly without repeating the word problem too many times. When talking about a challenging situation, it is important to explain why it was difficult. A very natural phrase is, time was running out. This is useful when you have limited time to solve something. For example, the interview was about to start and time was running out, so I decided to use another device. Another expression is, be under pressure. We use this when there are important consequences or expectations. For example, I was under a lot of pressure because my manager was relying on me. You can also say something threw me off, which means it disrupted your plans or made you feel less prepared. For example, the sudden technical issue completely threw me off before the presentation. Finally, be worried that is useful for explaining your concerns. For example, I was worried that the problem would affect my performance during the interview. When explaining how you solved a technological problem, you can use several natural phrases. The first one is troubleshoot the issue. This means trying to identify and fix the cause of a technical problem. For example, I spent a few minutes troubleshooting the issue, but I couldn't find the cause. Another useful phrase is switch to a backup plan. This is especially helpful when your first solution does not work and you need another option. For example, since my laptop wasn't working, I switched to a backup plan and used my tablet instead. You can also use find a workaround. This means finding an alternative way to complete a task without fixing the original problem completely. For example, I found a workaround that allowed me to finish the presentation on time. Finally, resolve the problem is a more formal way to say that you successfully solved the issue. For example, thankfully I was able to resolve the problem before the meeting started. So that's it for today's lesson. I hope these 2 model answers and the vocabulary from today's video have given you more confidence in tackling this type of cue card. If you'd like more practice, additional lessons, and exclusive content, consider becoming a member. Keep practicing, and I'll see you in the next one.